Okay, so here I want to talk quickly about problem number 3, and then I want to go over some of the process question here. Where do you submit this? How do you submit it? How will you be graded? And then what's the process after you've submitted it? All right, so process number 3. Now this problem is going to be bringing all your skills to bear because I'm asking you to actually create an argument here in problem number 3, an immediate inference, an argument that has exactly one premise statement and an argument that has exactly one conclusion. So number 1 says create a sound ordinary language, in other words, words like I'm using right now, standard form immediate inference that addresses one of the following topics, okay? So what you've got to do is you've got to think of 2 statements that are standard form categorical propositions, A claims, E claims, I claims, O claims, and you've got to create one premise that leads inevitably to a conclusion. And the way that you're going to do that is you're going to create a premise statement and then create a conclusion statement that uses one of the operations or rules on that premise to generate a conclusion. Okay, now remember, an argument is valid if it is impossible for the conclusion to be false when the premises are all true. Now you've got exactly one premise here. If my premise statement is an A claim, I know that I can use the operation of contraposition to create a totally new statement that will also be true if the original statement was true. So I could take my A claim premise, contrapose it, and there's my conclusion. So that's what you're going to do in response to one of the topics that you see here. You're going to create a nice immediate inference. Now, the way people mess up here on this is they only include the premise or they only include a conclusion. So just remind yourself, for problem number 1, you're going to have the word therefore right before your second sentence. All right, numbers 2 and 3 are pretty straightforward. What kind of statement is your premise? What kind of statement is your conclusion? You don't want to lose points on those. That would be kind of silly. The only way that people ever do lose points on these is if they just kind of hiccup and they don't, they maybe put the same answer twice for a premise when they're actually different statements or something along those lines. All right, number 4, symbolize the argument you created by reducing the categories to terms. Okay, here's how people lose points on this one. They don't include the categories that the letters refer to. They just symbolize out the argument. Or sometimes they'll just symbolize the premise and not the conclusion. So for number 4, you want to make sure that you symbolically represent with letters your premise statement, your conclusion statement, and that you indicate what those letters that are in your argument refer to, what the category of countable things are. And that's a good time for you, by the way, to check to make sure that your predicate terms are actually countable things, because you'll lose points for that because it won't be standard form. So if you come up with your categories of things that you're representing with letters and you realize that one of them isn't countable, it's just like the word green or something like that, go back and fix that argument so that everything is nice and countable. All right. Number 5, prove the argument valid by illustrating it with a Venn diagram. Okay. So remember, when you're Venn diagramming, you only diagram the premise, never the conclusion. But you're also working from the Aristotelian standpoint here. So you may have to make additional marks on your Venn diagram depending on what your premise is. All right, number 6, explain why you believe the argument is sound. Okay, so you're going to be doing here the same thing you did for the previous problem about something someone should do before they're 50, where I asked you in that one to explain, well, why do you think that's a true statement? Why do you think somebody should do that before they're 50? And you're going to be doing something similar here with number 6. You're just going to be explaining why the premise is a true statement, the premise of your argument. Now, the way people mess up here is they explain, most commonly, they'll explain why the conclusion is true and not the premise. But remember, your argument is a valid one. That means if your premise is true, the conclusion will be true. That means the burden's on you to convince us that the premise is true. So bring all the guns to this fight and do everything you can to provide as strong of a case as you can that your premise statement is a true statement. Think about yourself as a lawyer. You're in a court of law. You want to convince that jury of 12 that the claim you're making is a true one. Okay, so bring everything you have to bear. If you want to go out and do a Google search, or you have some information at your disposal, bring it to bear. Stuff like that's really valuable, much more valuable than you and I just saying like, well, this is what I think, or this is what my experience was. That's not ever terribly compelling evidence. All right, and then number 7, what reasons would someone offer for rejecting the premise? Okay, again, people make the mistake here of focusing in on the conclusion. Conclusion's not relevant here. We want to know why somebody would reject your premise, because if they're able to reject your premise, if they're able to make a better case that your premise statement is false, then they may convince you, like, you've got a valid argument, but it's not sound because your premise is false. All right, so you're thinking here about what is somebody going to say about my premise statement. So you think about like the Seth Rogen example. I think Seth Rogen as an actor is true. How in the world could somebody object to that? Well, they might come forward and say like, well, I realize that he calls himself an actor and lots of people think of him as an actor and he's won awards for acting, but he's not really acting. In my sense of the word, he's just playing himself. There's very little difference between the characters that he plays in his movies and who he seems to be in real life. So no, I don't think he's an actor. I think he's just somebody that makes films, but he's just kind of portraying himself or acting like himself in that. And so therefore he doesn't meet my definition of an actor, which is somebody that imitates the character of someone that they are not, or something along those lines. All right, so those are your 3 problems on this argument construction. So something you might want to do is visit this page, and you can access it from thought primer number 9. This is where you're going to actually submit your completed argument construction. So you're going to go right here. There's another way to get here. You could just go down to the assignments and look for it there. But it's right here on thought primer number 9. So you click this link, and it brings you to this page. Here's another place where you can download a copy of that assignment, and you'll notice a couple of things here. It is due on February 27th, okay? So that's Sunday. But look at this. All of this down here is the criteria for grading. There's 100 possible points that you could earn on this argument construction. And it says right up here at submission status, you get 5 points right out of the gate if you get this in before Sunday. Okay, so you could pick up those 5 points just by turning this thing in on time. But if you turn it in the week after this one, within 7 days of the posted due date, you still get 2.5 points. Now you could, if you wanted to be like super slacker, you could say, I'm not turning this thing in for a month or 2 months. Fine. You just won't get any points for your turning it in. Now you're operating off of 95 out of 100 points. So all is not lost, right? So even though this argument construction is really technical, much more technical than the other 2 we're going to do, this is always the one that folks say is the hardest of the 3. So once you get through this one, you are rock star ready to go. For the rest of them, but even if you don't get it in within these first 2 weeks, because it's taking you longer than you thought, you still have the possibility of getting 95. And remember how you're graded for this course. 80% average on all 3 categories is kind of as high as you can get. So that's what you're shooting for. All right, so you might want to review what's here. Problem number 1, question 1. The statement is correctly translated in standard form or not. So if you correctly translate that statement, you get 3 points. If you didn't, you get 0 points. Problem number 1, question 2. 2 false standard form propositions are correctly identified. If you did 2, you get 4 points. If you only got 1 false standard form categorical proposition, you get 1 point. I'm sorry, 2 points. And if you didn't get any, you get 0 points. All right, so you can kind of scroll through this and see that you're getting points for every single thing you're doing on this. Did you label your Venn diagrams? Is your Venn diagram marked correctly? You get points for all that stuff. So you're going to eventually submit this assignment to me. See if we can kick into student view. Oh, it's not going to let me. Oh, yeah, well, all right. So you can turn this assignment into me by clicking Start Assignment, and then here we go. You can either upload a file, you can do a text entry, although probably nobody will do that. And you see here's this link where you can add another file. So if you have separate files that contain pictures of your Venn diagram, or you hand wrote your whole argument construction and you took pictures, that's where you can be uploading those files. If you do upload multiple files of handwritten documents, in other words, you do the whole argument construction written out by hand, if you can figure out like how to consolidate all of those into one PDF, that is like super bomber helpful to me. It's not the end of the world. It just takes me a lot longer if I'm having to scroll through like 10 files, but no worries if you can't figure that out. All right, so now here's the exciting part. This is what happens. Your argument construction come to me, I get a notification. I'm really good about getting these things back to you quick because I want the information in your head to stay there and not for you to have to work on this after you've forgotten everything. So I'm going to respond to it really quick. So you want to keep checking into Canvas because at some point this thing's going to come back to you and it's going to have a score on it. Okay. If it's not a score you like, you should go back into Canvas and what you'll see is this rubric this scoring guide marked up. You will see exactly how many points you got for each problem. And any problem you did not get full points for, unless it's really obvious why you didn't get full points, you'll see a little comment from me. And the comment will say something like, hey, remember this is how this operation works. Or, hey, that statement would actually be true rather than false. Or make sure your predicate term is countable. You'll see little notes like that from me all the way throughout. And then I will be sending you an email the Monday after this is due with some instructions for how to go back in and just fix the problems you didn't get full points for. So you don't have to redo everything, but you can go back in, and sometimes it's like, oh my God, with 5 minutes of work, I could pick up 20 points. Literally, like that'll happen. So you'll want to look at my comments, and then you'll want to think about getting those corrections in. So think about where we're at right now. You get to work on your thought primers until you get 100% on all of them. We just go back and forth until you get it right. You get to work on this argument construction until you get the score you want. Okay? So there is no reason to be giving up on this course, because you just keep doing it until you learn it and until you can do it. If you get confused about something, you're like, oh my God, I'm stumped on this when this problem asks me to do this and I just do not understand that. Then it's like, okay, we're setting up a Zoom, or we'll have some email exchanges, but we're going to make sure we get you through it. All right? So argument construction number 1, exciting stuff.